Hey everybody, it's Steve, the amateur historian, walking in an area I've never walked through before, and I'm probably not going to vlog through here again. Not because like anything sketchy's happened, there's just too many kids running around. You know, every time I see some kids, I'm like, oh, time to turn the camera off. But anyway, I'm just finding new places to go, and anyway, it's June 12th, 2021. So you know what that means? A new day, a new story. And this is a story that may just positively make your skin crawl. But before we get to that, remember as always to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon. I'm always posting new stuff there. For you, I'm trying to post twice a week there, if I can, in the form of like little podcast things I've done, extra content, unexpected content, extra old videos that just, I never, I posted a long time ago and never posted again. It's all this stuff that you can't see unless you become a Patreon supporter for my channel. So remember to do that. The link is in the description below, as well as the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages, as well as my TikTok and subreddit links. They're all there. They're all just gone to a very industrial area. They're all there. And all that said, let's get to today's video. I'm in the industrial world now, boys. I don't know why I said it that way. So today's story takes us back to 1922. And they describe it as being in the Russell Street neighborhood, which Russell is one of the primary roads that goes through the Elliott neighbor, but also what was Old Town Albina. I've been to Old Town Albina numerous times, shown all the structures that still exist from Old Town. All those structures stand along Russell. So when they say the Russell, area, that pretty much tells me it's the Elliott neighborhood, or more strictly, or I guess less strictly, the Albina area. And essentially an emergency appropriation of cash was being made. 2,000 bucks, which, 2,000 bucks, that's, less than 2 months rent now, but 2,000 bucks back in 1922, that was a hefty stack of cash. What would this county need to be appropriating some 2,000 bucks for, in terms of something that was going on in the Russell Street area? I'm just gonna say I don't like this at all. But that area had experienced, and I've never heard of this before because I see them so rarely, they experienced, or were experiencing, an earwig infestation. Just saying it gives me goosebumps. Freaking hate earwigs. Is there anybody on this planet that likes earwigs? They got like the, the lobster claws on the front of their face, and it's just no thank you, sir. If I see an earwig come into my town, I'm like, sorry, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but move along, sir, you're not wanted here. So just, I saw that and I was like, that is hideously disgusting, that is emotionally troubling. I'm gonna do a video about that. So here we are. I've sunk to a new low. Ooh, we got some pooches. Because this day in history videos, they always bring out the pooches. As well as the sofas, free sofas. That is very wild. We have got some, I can't see them because the fence is dark and they're obviously tiny dogs, but, oh. Yeah, you don't like the earwigs, do you? Oh, there's a little sign that says dogs on the premises. I never would have guessed. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, earwigs. Go from something cute and cuddly to something horrific. So they were having an earwig infestation in the Russell. I don't remember if they called it. I think they referred to it as Russell Street in the article. And it's very interesting, and I don't know if there's an immediate connection, but there has to be a mild connection inferred. I have discussed numerous times about the history of, black people in Portland, which is not a pretty history. It is not a nice history. And up until around 1919, 1920, just a couple years before this article, where there's this infestation right in that area, there was essentially an agreement reached between real estate people in Portland and literally like the people that ran the city, that they were only going to sell properties to people of color in one certain little area, and that area was essentially the Albina area, right smack dab in the middle of this. And essentially up to that point, most people of color, African American people, Japanese, Chinese, they were all living in the kind of what is now the kind of the Chinatown and Pearl District areas. So around a little after the turn of the century, like, more railroad jobs started becoming available on the east side of the Willamette River, and all these white people had moved to the east side of the river, and suburbs were just kind of starting to become a thing. And all of a sudden, black people started moving one by one to the east side, because a lot of them wanted to work in the railroad yards on the east side of the river. And Whitey went into an absolute panic. There was actually a high, I don't remember the name of the person, but there was actually a high-ranking Portland city official who actively said, if we kept allowing black people to move over here, you would need a cop on every corner. This is quoted from like a city official. So that was the attitude. So starting in 1919, there was this idea that they were going to force everybody of color to live in this one specific area. And the process kind of started, the process kind of took off. And that is how parts of neighborhoods in northeast Portland became Portland's black neighborhood. That was the genesis of it. They were redlined everybody to this small area. And I find it interesting, because obviously if they're going to pick a certain area to only sell to certain people and people that they obviously deemed as inferior people, they were going to pick an area that wasn't in that great a shape. And the Albina area used to flourish. The streetcar line went right through there, and they were a blossoming community at one time. But by the 1910s, it was kind of fading. A lot of the people that were still living there were kind of people that were too poor to live anywhere else. And it was kind of regarded as kind of becoming a poor neighborhood. And so, this story about this earwig infestation, which is so the kind of story you'd think about, you'd read this in a story about like that this would happen in like a really poor neighborhood or a really like overrun apartment complex that was like really low income housing of some kind. Like, not that that's always the case, but that might be the direction that your mind goes. This was the kind of area that only like a couple years earlier they were starting to force a bunch of people into living there because they knew it wasn't a great area. And here you have an earwig outbreak, again, within a couple of years of that effort, I guess you can call it, starting to be pushed, of trying to force people of a certain color to live in a certain area. And of course, the history of how, again, that area was already kind of not in the best of shape. But then, decades and decades went by where the city essentially just neglected that whole area. And, so the struggles of living there became worse and worse. And, it culminated by the 1980s, parts up in that, northeast Portland, as close to a ghetto as Portland's ever had. A real ghetto. So it doesn't surprise me that for something this bothersome, that it would happen in an area like that the white people had already kind of dictated, this is kind of a crappy area. So let's just make them all. We're only going to sell, obviously we're going to sell them property in Laurelhurst or the Buckman neighborhood. You know, we're going to sell property to people in areas that were blossoming or still flourishing, even though they were neighborhoods that had been around for a while. They're going to force these people into horrible areas like this, where randomly earwig infestations occur. Do you hear me, man? Don't just drive away from me. I'm talking about earwig infestations. That should make anybody's ears perk up. And now the accepting of this, you know, $2,000 appropriation of money for that specific little area. I mean, it was hardly even a full neighborhood that they were appropriating $2,000 for, because the issue was so bad. That was agreed upon with the stipulation, the caveat, if you will, which I just like that word. That $6,000 would be appropriated for the city as a whole to pretty much make sure that pest extermination was being engaged in all over the city. So that would happen here in this one little area, wouldn't happen elsewhere in Portland. But it just really shows you how much more serious the issue was, specifically in that realm of like Russell, and probably Old Town Albina in that area. That $2,000 were appropriated for that little spot, and then $6,000 were appropriated for literally all the rest of, actually all the rest of the county, not just Portland. This was county funds. So this was Portland, this was Gresham, this was Fairview, Troutdale. They probably, anybody living far enough out in the gorge, like way to the east part of the county's probably like, you're not even really people, fend for yourselves. If you want to build yourself a cabin out in the gorge somewhere, you should be expecting pests all the time. You got a termite problem? Don't build a cabin alone out in the middle of the forest, jackass. Yeah, it just goes to show, like, they appropriated so much money for that one little community because it was probably so bad. And I just saw, you know, when you're looking through newspaper articles from the early 1920s and you just see in big print, earwig, you're like, wait, what? Okay, I don't even know what this article's about, but I'm doing a video on it. And fortunately, so it seems, you know, the biggest complaints that the public could have had about having an earwig infestation, and that could have gotten pretty dark and pretty troubling really quick. I mean, we have the makings for a really corny late 70s horror film, when movies like the Killer Bees movie and like the Killer Ants movie stuff were coming out. But fortunately, it seems people's biggest gripe was not that earwigs were like getting on them and stuff. It was more that the earwigs were like chomping up their vegetation. And they didn't like that. Back in this day, a lot more people were, you know, growing their own food and stuff. So this is actually kind of a legitimate gripe that people would have. Even though, you know, today we'd be worried about, I mean, I find one earwig in my home and I'm ready to like search around with a flashlight. Like if there's one more in here, I'm moving out. And you know, they had to bring this like big commissioner session together. We gotta deal with this. And like the district attorney was Stanley Myers was the guy's name, and he was just kind of like, well, I don't know if you have the authority to request such appropriations. And I'm like, dude, there's earwigs running amok in your city. Like, what are you even talking about? That's like it being today, and or not even today, let's say it was like a year ago, and the commission of the city is, like the county or the city, whatever, is getting together and saying, like, we need to establish like a mask mandate because this COVID thing's getting out of control. We still don't really know a whole lot about it yet. And the district attorney, or, you know, someone with high authority, stands up and is like, well, I don't really know if you have the authority to do that. And meanwhile, COVID's just going nuts and ravaging your area, and it's like, what are you talking about? Now, obviously, COVID is a much more deeper, significant issue than, say, an earwig infestation, but it's just the ignorance of the whole thing. Well, and of course, the blind ignorance to it. Here's this district attorney guy. He probably lived in one of those really nice houses in Southwest Portland. His life is fine. He has no real concept of the struggles that other people have, even though, you know, you get into a high place of power in a city. Your job is supposed to be to address issues and make your community, your city, your county, whatever position you're living at, as livable and as flourishing as possible. But of course, the problem is so many people that get elected in those positions didn't really grow up with a whole lot of struggles, or some of them may have, but they've been in a position of power so long that they've just, it's like they've forgotten all about that. So when the poor neighborhoods are struggling, somebody stuffed like a bun into that fence. When the poor people are struggling, there's always, it's not just Portland, it's not just Multnomah County, this is everywhere. When it's a poor area and they're having an issue, whether it's a pest infestation, or there's all kinds of housing issues, or there's educational issues, their schools aren't being as well taken care of, there's economic problems, their businesses aren't thriving as much because everyone who lives around the businesses in that area is poor and can't afford to pay to support them by, you know, buying their goods and services. A lot of times the city will just, you know, the mayor, the, you know, some city council person, the city planner, whatever, will, you know, get up on their high horse and be like, oh, this is horrible, this can't be tolerated, and we're gonna do everything we can to make this problem go away. And then they go into their back office and sit down and say, okay, like, how do we do the least amount of work possible to appease this situation as much as possible? You know, and that's even more so the case, but that's always been the case. Poor people are not of the same level of value and concern as people with money and influence. That is the attitude, and it's a prevailing attitude, and it's been in place since, you know, I mean, ancient Rome was like that. You know, it's always been that way. Poor people are lesser people, is the prevailing attitude. So of course you get a district attorney who's like, yeah, this is a bad thing, but do we really want to spend a bunch of money on like a pest infestation? Do we really want to spend that much money on this poor neighborhood? That again, by this point, it was already understood in the circles of Portland politics that this area was rapidly being transformed, or it was going to be, it was inevitable, it was going to be transformed into Portland's black neighborhood. So again, you know, there's more incentive for these rich white people, many of whom were probably racist to some degree or another. You know, what are they going to care that the neighborhood that's ultimately going to become mostly people of color anyway, whether they're having this issue, that issue, or this one? You know, not really a lot of incentive for them to care that much. And so you get that kind of attitude. Who would have thought a video that I started talking about an earwig infestation would get so damn political by the end? But hopefully you see what I'm talking about, you see where I'm standing, you see where I'm going with this. So before I get too crazy, before I get too political, before I get too nuts, I'm gonna end it right there. I don't really know what more to talk about. I assume the money did ultimately go through and that these people got rid of their earwig problem. I sincerely hope that's what happened. Who wants to live with an earwig issue that nobody's gonna help you with? Well, I guess at that point you just gotta help yourself. So anyway, thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully that video didn't give you nightmares, didn't make you like start like freaking and grabbing at every little like little random movement you do. It's like, oh, earwig. No, I'm fine, I'm fine. Hopefully I didn't permanently traumatize you for life. If so, you can say, you can send me your therapy bills if you want. I'm not gonna pay them, but I mean, if it makes you feel better. Anyway, enough silliness. I'd like to thank you so much for stopping by, for supporting the channel, for supporting the series, for supporting me, even when I'm talking about content that literally makes people's skin crawl. So remember, as always, to like, share, subscribe, hit on my Patreon. Remember, there's a multitude of different types of things that I'll be posting there, and I'm trying to post at least twice a week there for you, but you can't see any of that unless you become a Patreon supporter today. And that link is in my description. Why did I say that? My description. The description. The royal description. That is in the description of this video, as well as the links to my Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and subreddit. Hooey! With all that said, one more time, thank you so much for stopping by, and sorry about traumatizing you. This has been Steve, the amateur historian, and I'll see you tomorrow.